Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Monday, August 7th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your day every single day. How do you do that? Well, you go to your favorite podcast app, you go to YouTube, you search up Locked On Boston Bruins, and you hit that subscribe button so that each new episode will be automatically added to your feeds for you to download, listen, and enjoy. Through the month of August, we are down to 3 episodes per week, but will, of course, ramp things back up as training camp and opening night approach. If you're on social media, you can find the podcast at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, and dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. Bit of a different episode today, as I will be playing a clip from the Locked On Prospect coverage, where they look at all 32 teams around the NHL and rank the prospect pools. Now, the good news is the Bruins aren't dead last, as they are in some other rankings, but the bad news is still pretty low, and I'll play that segment for you and then offer my comments later on in the show. But first, quick update on David Krejci. It was reported that he was perhaps announcing his retirement imminently. There was speculation that since he was coming back to Boston over the weekend for Charlie McAvoy's wedding, which looked amazing, by the way, and congrats to the McAvoys on their nuptials, that maybe Krejci would announce his retirement at the same time. And that would come, a couple weeks after Patrice Bergeron did the same. However, and stick tap to Dominic Tiano on Twitter for linking to a Czech article that suggests that Krejci may not make a decision anytime soon. Now, he is perhaps eyeing a spot at the World Championship in 2024, which will be played in Prague, I believe, in Czechia. So if he were to play in that tournament, if that's how he wants to finish his career, then perhaps the NHL might not be in the plans, because ideally the Bruins would be playing playoff hockey at that time. In this sport.cz article, Krejci says, and of course this is a Google translation, so we always have to be careful with that. He said he's attracted to the domestic championship, and if he returned to the NHL and make the playoffs, Prague very much not likely to happen unless the Bruins are bounced in the first round and he joins the tournament late. He has a strong desire to play for the Czechia team, and so in the end, he's saying 99% he won't start the season anywhere in the NHL, in Czech Republic, nowhere in Europe. If it takes till Christmas to decide, then it will just be until Christmas. He added he will maintain himself so that a few weeks or a month will be enough for him to decide to jump in. He has bronze medals from the 2012 and 2022 World Championship. And, this desire to play in Prague, coupled with kind of the Bruins kind of being right up against the cap, already having the roster pretty much set would suggest that Krejci is done at the NHL level, not necessarily done with hockey altogether. And of course, there was a report last week from Boston Hockey Now suggesting that Krejci's retirement was imminent and that it wouldn't come with a lot of fanfare because, of course, he had already left the Bruins once in the past. But as far as Krejci's concerned, he's taking his time and might not make a decision until around December. I would not be surprised if, in fact, he does come back, plays for a bit in Czechia in preparation for the World Championship. Of course, if a Stanley Cup is his main priority, not likely to happen in Boston. This past season was his best last chance of going out on top in the NHL. If he wants to try to go out on top with the national team, then, maybe even not going out on top, but he'll have an opportunity to finish out at home at the very least. So that's the latest on David Krejci. Next up, we're going to pivot to the Locked On Prospect report and hear their take on why the Boston Bruins are ranked, spoiler alert, 29th out of 32 when it comes to prospect pools. And we're going to get to that here after the break. Athletic Greens has a product that we are so behind here on the Locked On Network, and we're just so excited to be partnering with them. It's a daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. A lot of people drink it literally every day because it gives them that extra boost and just helps people feel healthy. It replaces your multivitamin, probiotic, and more in one simple drinkable habit. It's got a science-driven formula of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food-sourced nutrients. They're raising the standard for quality in the supplement category, and they help you build your health foundation first. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1/NHL Network to check it out. It's a micro habit that delivers macro benefits and helps just about everybody take great care of their health every single day. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Boston Bruins part of your day every single day. Again, 3 episodes through the month of August. 3 episodes per week, that is. And coming up, we're going to start looking at individual Atlantic Division teams and how the Bruins stack up against them coming up this next season. All right, let's take it to the Locked On Bruins prospect segment where they break down where the Bruins rank. And then following that, I'll jump back in with some of my thoughts.
We'll start with Boston here at 29. I know you wanted them a bit lower than 29. You thought they were kind of a bottom 3 ranking. I can see where you're coming from, but I still believe deeply and profoundly in what Fabian Lysell brings to the game. What do you like about Lysell, and is he for you kind of the standout prospect in Boston?
He's the only prospect that excites me in this pool, and I think that's one of the reasons I wanted them a bit lower. Is if we're ranking entire pools, I want some semblance of depth. And some of the other teams that we mentioned earlier had more depth, but Lysell is the best player that we've looked at so far. So I'm totally fine with this. I'm not at all against it. And they were also, I mean, like my personal bottom 4 teams are the bottom 4 teams that we have in our collective rankings. So I really can't complain. Lysell is exceptionally skilled and a really intelligent offensive player. He knows how to break down defensive structures. He's a tremendous skater. The skating ability is really impressive. And he's a fantastic playmaker. He can score goals. not the strongest defensive player. There are some definite question marks in terms of perhaps his off puck engagement, his defensive play, and there's been a lot of question marks around character things, which we're not going to delve into because at least I don't have all the information here. But that is also a little asterisk for me on Lysell. I've heard some things that aren't the greatest, but I really, again, cannot confirm those. So we're not gonna go in down that rabbit hole. But I think that may have maybe a bit more hesitant to rank them highly based off of just him. But in just a hockey context, this is a really skilled player, and there's a reason that he was always been a bit selfish with the puck on the ice, because he's really, really good with the puck on his stick. He can really make things happen. From a hockey standpoint, he fell way too far in the draft. But yeah, he to me is really the most, by far the most interesting player in Boston's pool.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I feel like with Lysell, you're getting a player who's consistently going to be upping the pace of play whenever he gets to the puck. He loves to push the pace. He loves to accelerate out of receptions, and generally makes the pace of play on the ice faster every time he gets the puck. For me, it's just a matter of, does he learn the ability to control his speed in a way where he's using it efficiently rather than just accelerating every play? Because there are instances where using his skating in order to slow down the play, to take a step back, to delay and then accelerate quickly at just the right moment in order to get past the player, those are the elements of his game that I want to see improved. I remember one of the earlier episodes before he came on, I was talking about Lysell and comparing that with a guy like Thierry Henry in soccer, and the development that he followed in INF Clairefontaine, which is one of the best development programs in all of international soccer. And he distinctly mentioned that the thing that made him so good was that his coaches forced him to not beat every player with speed. They forced him to adapt, to find different ways to score, to find different ways to be effective. And that's what Lysell needs to do. He needs to face scenarios where he can't use a speed in order to overwhelm players with pace. That's what I'm looking for from Lysell, but I really like this skill set. Another player I'd mention would probably be Mason Lohrei. That's the only other player that I'd say has, kind of is up there with me in terms of interest for players in the Bruins pool. I like when...
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. I'll say my piece afterwards.
Absolutely. So I really like what Mason Lohrei brings to the game. He's a big guy, but doesn't rely exclusively on his strength and size. I really like the offensive game on him. He's a very surprisingly shifty and elusive and intelligent, crafty player with the puck, which I was really surprised to see once he got drafted by Boston, because Boston like their defensemen a certain way, and when they're small, they still play that certain way, that physical, in your face, never leaving you space type of player. He's certainly that, but he's also got some crafty elements to his game that I really like. Very good blue line shooter. I wonder about the deception at times. That does lack in certain elements, but the craftiness and transition is really evident, and that's one thing I really like out of his game. So he's one guy that I would put in that category in terms of the players I'm interested in. He's definitely not on Lysell's talent level at all, but he's certainly a very interesting profile of player that I was kind of surprised to see the Bruins pick up. And once they picked him up, I was surprised to see what kind of player he was once I started delving into his game.
Yeah, I think one more name I'm going to throw in there too is Brandon Busey. I think obviously he had it was coming out season last year, right? And but I've watched some of his AHL tape as well. I've been really impressed with what I've seen from him, and goalies develop weirdly. So I think I'm a bit more open to those out of nowhere players kind of sticking to it when they're goalies compared to skaters, because we see it happening a lot more often. Whereas with players, sometimes you have that breakthrough season or that one-off exceptional productive season and then complete regression back to the norm. Whereas with goalies, it's a bit more wacky. And I think that Busey could continue on that trend. But he's the last of the quote unquote really interesting prospects. But Boston has quite a few names that we find intriguing rather than perhaps promising. So what are some of your intriguing talents here?
Definitely Matthew Poitras out of the Guelph Storm and Beckett Hendrickson, who will be developing with the Sioux Falls Stampede next year. Those are two guys that are very particular in the way that they play. Beckett Hendrickson is one of the best playmakers out of last year's draft, but it's just outside of that. Even his vision itself, it's his craftiness, his setups for his passes are kind of iffy. But I really like the ability to manipulate defenders, to send him one way, pass the other, and especially the accuracy and precision and his ability to spot lanes that other players wouldn't. I really like that out of him. It's just outside of that skill set, what does he bring? He's not necessarily the quickest skater, not necessarily the best defensively, not necessarily the most physical player. There's a lot of areas in this game that are lacking, but if you can build around his specialized skill set as a playmaker and make him just a pure connector on the line, you can pair him with a sniper and just have a fantastic 1-2 punch of one guy who sets up no matter what happens and one guy who scores no matter what happens. It's a great lethal duo you can build off of that. And building off of that, we've got Matt Poitras, who for me is a very good scorer, decent two-way player, but nothing in his game necessarily stands out. He's a very kind of jack of all trades type of player. And you can stick him in any role; he'll probably do a decent job. I just have a lot of trouble projecting him to the NHL as anything past a third liner. I don't know if you agree with that.
I don't even know if third liner is what I'd project. I think fourth line is most likely, and third line would be optimistic.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I fully agree. So those are the two guys that kind of put in that category. Maybe Jackson Edward as well, another defenseman out of the the London Knights. And he's one guy who I've been on and off in terms of my viewings of him. I've watched him a lot in passing, and I feel like every game I'm watching a different player. So I'm having trouble nailing down what he does best, but I see a lot of areas in this game that you could develop into something. So he's another one of those players who's kind of a template player. You can pretty much turn him into anything. But I think the quickest and most straightforward path to the NHL is probably as a rush defending kind of two-way guy on the third line. That's probably what you're getting out of Edward. But like we mentioned, a lot of intriguing players, a lot of kind of experiments, but nothing really concrete.
I think Reed Dick and Cole Spice are another two players that are notable. I think Reed Dick is an interesting goalie prospect. Decently athletic, but he needs to learn to control his movements a bit more. And I think he's progressed decently since his draft year. And Cole Spicer had a really, really tough freshman season in college.
Only 6 points in 30 games?
Yep. Yeah. 3 goals, 3 assists, and I think 32 games. But he was really only put in a depth role. And I did like what I saw of him with the NTDP. Now I'm not nearly as hopeful as I was a year ago on his standpoint, but I still think he's worth a mention here.
Absolutely. A great two-way player, but like you mentioned, a rough year.
All right. Welcome back as we discuss what was just said by the Locked On Fantasy Prospect guys. And I mean, it's really hard to argue with what they're saying here. The Boston Bruins prospect pool is relatively thin. Now, listening to what they were saying, it's clear that they were focusing more on guys who are still in junior or perhaps 1 year deep into the AHL in the case of Lysell and goaltender Brendan Bussey, Mason Lohrei having made the jump as well. But they didn't focus on guys like Mark McLaughlin, Georgi Merkulov, Jacob Lauko, Oscar Steen, guys who are a bit more advanced, perhaps not really prospects at this point, but more AHL level guys looking to make the jump up to the NHL. When it comes to the prospect pipeline, it is relatively thin for the Boston Bruins, and that is partly a function of poor drafting. As we know, the Bruins, not the best drafting team, and it's not just the Don Sweeney thing either. This goes back to the Peter Chiarelli days. Some pretty questionable draft picks along the way, but it's also a function of Boston having made several trades along the way where they parted ways with a lot of top draft picks. First round picks gone over several years here for the Bruins. And as a result, the pipeline is not very prolific. You know, they didn't have a first in 2018, no first in 2020, no first in 2022, and no first or second this past year. Lysell, clearly the cream of the crop. They were lucky to get him at 21st. And while he still has a lot to work on in his game, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's back in the AHL to begin this season. The all-around talent is there to succeed. And this season's going to be a big one for him as he proves that he is able to take his game to the next level, meaning the NHL. Mason Lohrei as well, not, as the guys mentioned, a typical Bruin, but his skill set is pretty high. His confidence is very high. I've spent the weekend watching a lot of episodes of the Apple TV show Swagger, which is like Friday Night Lights for basketball. That's how I would describe Mason Lohrei. The kid has swagger, and I'm excited to see what he can do at the pro level this coming season. Interesting notes there on Matt Poitras. A lot of people after development camp were pumping him up as a candidate to make the Bruins this season. I love Matt Poitras. I've watched him a lot here in Guelph. Not quite ready for the NHL. He's still only 19 years old. He just turned 19 in March. Had a fantastic season last year for Guelph. 16 goals, 79 assists for 95 points. Should top the 100-point mark this coming season. I'm a bit worried that he's going to be traded. Selfishly, I'd like to watch him all season long. But Guelph probably not going to be great this season, so I could see him traded to a contender later on in the year. And perhaps making the jump to Providence at the end of this season when he's 20. But I don't see it happening out of training camp. But he's going to be a guy to keep an eye on for sure. It was interesting that they mentioned Brett Hendrickson, Cole Spicer. There wasn't really much talk of Dan's Luckmelis or Frederick Brunet, who have some upside for sure. Brett Harrison was not mentioned in that segment. Really looking forward to seeing what he can do coming up this coming season. You know, it's easy to look at Bruins prospects with black and gold goggles and say, the Bruins have done okay restocking the pipeline without a bunch of top picks lately. However, if you look at the general consensus around the NHL, there's not much there. And, if some of these guys can make it to the NHL level, then that's a win. John Beecher has an opportunity to do that this season. Jacob Lauko has an opportunity to become a lineup regular. We all know what happened with Jack Stanika, who was hyped up as the next center candidate. You see a lot there, and then these guys move on, and they just don't pop. It's not just that it didn't work out in Boston. Some of these guys just haven't panned out. And you look at draft records, rarely do beyond the second round is there guys that are really guaranteed to make the NHL. So Poitras, I can see jumping, but he needs to add some size, some physicality. Lysell, if he doesn't, that will be a major disappointment. Brett Harrison, third-round pick. Mason Lohrei, John Beecher. Those are the drafted players that I really want to see take the next step this coming season, along with Jacob Lauko. Mark McLaughlin, Georgian Berkulov, signed as, undrafted players. Oscar Steen, I'd like to see make a move as well. But again, at the end of the day, there's not really much there. If the Bruins can get some regulars out of this prospect pool, then that's a bonus. And there's going to be a lot of restocking of the pipeline coming up in the next several years. And, they're ideally won't have a first round pick this year. It's top 10 protected if they finish in the top or bottom 10. Not a great season for the Bruins, obviously, but and then they would lose their 2025 first round pick. All that to say, the Bruins will need to rebuild on the fly here, restock on the fly, and be able to attract NHL level talent without relying on their prospect pool to become a contender once again. Let me know what you think by dropping a comment on YouTube or on social media. And thanks so much for taking some time to listen today, friends. Very much appreciate your support. And we'll be back here in a couple days with a brand new episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.